Hi there, I'm Jen, this is Remembered Reads, and this is going to be both a library haul and kind of a theoretical TBR, or I guess we call it an accidental TBR for the Asian Readathon that will be going on in May. I have a stack of library books and a couple of things that I bought. You know, I'm a big fan of doing accidental readathons where you can just see what fits from what you were going to read anyway. So I'm going to go through my library stack and also talk about which items fit or not with the Asian Readathon. So first I'll hold up some books that don't fit. This is The January Children by Sophia El Hilo. She is Sudanese American. This is poetry. At this moment, April is not over and April is National Poetry Month, so I'll be reading this for that, but it obviously does not fit with next month's Readathon. Next up I have Richard Wagamise's Starlight. This does not count for the Asian Readathon because he's an Indigenous Canadian. This was published posthumously and as far as I know is incomplete, so I'm curious to see how it ends up ending because the way I've seen this described is that it is properly incomplete. Like it's not just a earlier draft, it ends and is obviously not meant to end at that point. So I'm curious to get to this. Next up is another book of poetry. This is The Weight of Dreams by Jeevan Bhagwat. This is described as like a book about love and disappointment, which that sounds depressing. This is a collection of poetry, so will I save this for May and have it count for the Asian Readathon, or will I read it over this next week and have it count for National Poetry Month? We'll find out. Next up, I have Marcelino Truong's Saigon Calling. This is the sequel to the book which I believe in English is called Such a Lovely Little War. I read the first volume in French, but for whatever reason my library only has the second volume in the English translation, so I will read that. This is a graphic memoir, and I think one of the Asian Readathon prompts is to read a graphic novel, and I think a graphic memoir will count for that. And I think reading a translation is also one of the prompts, and this is translated. And Marcelino Truong is Vietnamese French. I have a book that the Read Around the World book club was reading last year, and I thought I should read that sometime and never read it. And that's Voices from Chernobyl, The Oral History of a Nuclear Disaster. This does not count for the Asian Readathon, although technically when the meltdown happened, was the 80s, so Ukraine wasn't independent. It was the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union is technically a cross-continental country. So if I were going to cheat, I could say, well, the Soviet Union is Asian. Because I believe the Readathon states that cross-continental countries like Russia, Turkey, Azerbaijan count. So that I could stretch the rules and say that counts, but I don't think it counts. Next up is The Woo Woo by Lindsay Wong. This was on one of the Canada Reads list. This is a memoir about the author growing up in a family where there was a lot of mental illness that was described in a lot of wild ways. The subheading on this is How I Survived Ice Hockey, Drug Raids, Demons, and My Crazy Chinese Family. And the author is Chinese Canadian, so that counts for the Readathon. Next up, I have Myanmar's Enemy Within, Buddhist Violence and the Making of a Muslim Other. This is by Francis Wade and is a look at the current ongoing violence in northern Myanmar or Burma. I started reading this a while ago and then suddenly I had to return it to the library because someone else had it on hold, so I've just retaken this out and hope to get further along in it because I'm interested to read more about that. The author is British, but the subject is obviously Myanmar, so does that count? Maybe. Next up, I have The Weight of Our Sky by Hanna Alkaf. This is a young adult novel. It has a scooter on the front, which is set in the late 60s in Malaysia when there was some riots and violence and whatnot, and this, I believe, talks about that time through the eyes of these two kids, one of whom is Malay and one of whom is Chinese Malaysian. This was published by Salam Reads, who has put out a number of really solid children's books lately. I've been impressed with most of the ones that they've put out, so that's why I wanted to pick this up. And the author is Malaysian, so counts. Next up, I have Kamal Al-Solaylee's Brown, What Being Brown Means in the World Today to Everyone. I enjoyed this author's writing when he was an arts critic at the Globe and Mail, but his memoir, Intolerable, which I read a couple of years ago, I thought was surprisingly uninspiring considering how much drama he and his family have lived through. I think it'll be interesting to see him write long-form nonfiction like this without it being so personal, because I felt like in the memoir, some of the things that he wasn't talking about, he might have just been hiding because he didn't want to offend his previous partner or his siblings or something. Although that might not be true, I don't know. I always enjoy some socio-political commentary. And he's from Yemen originally, so that counts. Next up are 3 books that wouldn't count for the readathon because these are in Martha Wells' Murderbot series. These are the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th book in that series, and she's Anglo-American, I think. Anyway, they're about a robot. Next up, I have A Sinner in Mecca by Parvez Sharma. The subheading on this one is A Gay Muslim's Hajj of Defiance. He is a Indian-American writer who writes a lot on the subject of basically the interactions of the social and the political with cultural and religious elements. Somebody described him to me as being like a male American Irshad Manji, and I had always enjoyed her writing, but I read her about the first quarter of her most recent book, and I was just like, what? It was ridiculous? Like, she had a midlife crisis or something. I don't know. It was like addressed to her dog. It's a weird book. I will finish it eventually, but I mean, and I have a dog, but like that's a step too far, even for me. Anyway, I'm sorry. That had nothing to do. Yeah. So anyway, that counts for the readathon. Oh yeah, because I think there's a intersectional identities category, so that counts for that. Okay, this is the last of the library books. This is Chinatown Ghosts by Jim Wong-Chu, who is Chinese-Canadian. This is a collection of photographs and poetry that was originally published in 1986. And this apparently was out of print for a long time, but for the 25th anniversary of the publication, they put out this new edition, which includes the photos, because I guess the photos weren't part of the original piece. So this should be interesting, because I really enjoy seeing things that are republished with additional information and additional pieces, so I'm looking forward to that. And obviously this counts for the readathon. So I bought 2 things also, even though I'm not generally a big book shopper. The first of which is this really nice collection of First World War poetry. I didn't really need another nice collection of First World War poetry, but hey, this is where we are. I believe all the poets in this are English, so it does not count for the readathon, but I just wanted to share this because it is so pretty. And then the other book that I picked up recently, both of these I got secondhand, is Orhan Pamuk's Istanbul, Memories of a City. I've read this before, but I didn't own a copy because it was from the library. This is a little more yellowed than I had realized it was when I bought it, but it was only $2, so I can't complain too much. This, as I said when I was talking about the Soviet Union, the readathon does say that cross-continental authors and characters count, so this does count for the readathon. And I mean, Orhan Pamuk interrogates the kind of identity question of, you know, are we Europeans or Asians? And so there we go. Yeah, this is much more yellowed than I thought it was. $2. It's okay. So that's what I have out of the library and what I bought recently, and most of those would qualify within the confines of the Asian readathon and would fulfill, I think, most of the prompts. I don't have them in front of me, but I know one was a graphic novel. I know one was translated, one was intersectional identities, and I think it was, if you're reading more than one book, they have to be from different countries or cultural backgrounds. I think all of these are. So, sound successful? Sound successful is about as good as it gets when it comes to accidental readathons. So yeah, have you taken anything interesting out of the library lately? And are you participating in the Asian Readathon or anything related to the upcoming Asian Heritage Month, which I think might be called Asian Pacific Islander History Month in the US maybe? Either way, let me know. That's it for now. Ciao.